Wexner thought that he was a god.
Victoria's Secret put girls on the map.
Every celebrity wanted to be part of that show.
Business was so good.
Victoria's Secret made fortunes on young bodies.
It wasn't about the clothes. It was models fulfilling this idea of fantasy.
There was something else going on.
There's a number of red flags.
The modeling industry have people who allowed bad things to happen.
Did Les Wexner know about that?
And there's this huge mystery.
People had mentioned his name.
And part of the mystery was Jeffrey Epstein. What Wexner did was unthinkable, giving him power of attorney. But there's a larger picture here.
Politicians, royalties,
Intelligence agencies.
Why was Epstein doing this? Was this about power and blackmail?
And makes you wonder how many more layers there are to this world.
This is all a story that was meant to stay hidden.
Ignore some difficult questions about billionaire founder Les Wexner's ties to the late financier Epstein, who was indicted on sex trafficking charges.
In terms of legacy, people remember the great villains more than they remember the great heroes. And so I think how you feel about yourself, what do you say about yourself when you put your head on a pillow? Are you really proud of what you're doing and the way you're doing it? I think it's really a fundamental question.
But I realized later that there are people who allowed a lot of bad things to happen.
Fashion is essentially amoral. It doesn't care about good or bad. It has no ethics. It has one rule: sell the frock. No matter the collateral damage. So it never really surprised me as the Jeffrey Epstein onion was unpeeled. What face was on the next layer of the onion? Oh, here's Les Wexner right at the top.
We were the first American company to do business in the PRC before the United States government had consular relations with China. Can you blame me?
In the earlier years, it was kind of tough to get models who were willing to model lingerie. It wasn't easy, but we did it.
He invited Jackie Onassis to the christening of this store. All the photographers were there. This was a big paparazzi moment because he wanted that respect with New York society and high fashion New York. This was something that obviously was really important to him. Anytime when you see a socialite like that paired with a retailer like Les Wexner, it's understood that someone has written out a very big check.
This was about the time Jeffrey Epstein came into Wexner's life.
Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout who somehow managed to get a job teaching at the very prestigious prep school Dalton in New York, hired by Donald Barr, whose son was William Barr, the Trump administration's attorney general. It was at Dalton that Epstein met Ace Greenberg, who was a parent there. Greenberg ran Bear Stearns, an investment bank, and that was Epstein's next job, working for Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns wasn't one of those white shoe Wall Street firms. It was a rough and tumble streetwise place run by Jewish guys. And it was at Bear that Epstein manifested a trait that would be part of his career thereafter, which was worming his way into the lives of older, successful, influential Jewish men.
Epstein was extraordinarily mesmerizing and could convince anything of anybody. The master manipulator.
After a time, Epstein develops this cloud of suspicion about various misdeeds around him at Bear Stearns. And he's eventually forced out in 1981. But importantly, Ace Greenberg opens the door for Epstein to this world. And that is what really seals the deal for him.
Jeffrey Epstein would eventually take on as his key client, Leslie Wexner. When Les Wexner met Jeffrey Epstein, he apparently remarked that Jeffrey Epstein was so exciting, that Epstein was everything that Les Wexner thought was lacking in Ohio.
Both Epstein, apparently, and Wexner, definitely, were very smart men. And each one must have fulfilled the need of the other. Wexner had the money that Epstein was seeking. And Wexner got from Epstein the glamour and smoothness that he was seeking. And I'm not at all inferring it was a sexual need, but there's something there.
Wexner bought this fabulous townhouse, the biggest private house in Manhattan.
It being the largest house in the city strikes me as a sort of desperate move, because the biggest house is also a little gauche in some ways.
Even with Epstein's help, Wexner stayed an outsider in New York City. He never became part of the cultural New York world or the fashion New York world. This has happened time immemorial. You know, the Midwest king of the hill comes to New York and discovers that he's really just a pimple on New York's backside.
So at that point, Jeffrey Epstein bought that townhouse and maneuvered to acquire it from Les Wexner.
Wexner eventually sold it to Epstein, and it wasn't until years later that there was a transfer of real estate deed.
Epstein paid upwards of $20 million for the townhouse, but there's no question that the property ended up being worth so much more than he paid for it.
After Epstein had managed to navigate his way into Wexner's life, Wexner did something that I've never seen in all of my years of reporting. He granted full power of attorney to Epstein and gave him unmitigated control over all of his assets, 20 of Wexner's companies, 19 trusts, and different charitable foundations. He was able to manage his real estate. He managed his investments. He managed his businesses. There wasn't a part of Wexner's empire that Epstein didn't have access to and didn't have some ability to control. And so to give carte blanche to someone the way he did with Epstein is such a puzzle.
Here was Jeffrey Epstein, who was obviously a con man to anyone paying any attention. I think the million-dollar question is why a gentleman as brilliant as Leslie Wexner could allow this guy into his life.
Years later, when I heard Epstein was involved in the business, it struck me as odd because Les was a micromanager and someone who was involved in every aspect of the business. I couldn't believe that Les would let that happen. Something was amiss.
Epstein was at the first ever fashion show, and he even eventually found himself sitting near Wexner at one of the later fashion shows. It was something that he was able to use much to his advantage, certainly in his early years of predation, as a kind of calling card that got him introductions where he wanted.
I thought it was fun to be part of it, but I feel like I was playing a game or something that wasn't really real at all and wasn't very aspirational.
The fact that the show made millions of people happy and tune in is a phenomenon. And there's another side of that too, which is that, you know, there were people that were kind of tortured by it too.
Sometime in the spring or summer of '93, an executive came into my office quite upset. She said she had been informed that a man was in New York portraying himself as a recruiter for Victoria's Secret catalog models. And I asked her if she knew his name, and she said Jeffrey Epstein. It's like, oh boy, this is trouble. So I asked this executive to call Les directly and tell him what was happening. She did, and Les told her he would put a stop to it. The point being that inappropriate behavior was reported to Les sometime in '93.
In 1997, I filed a sexual battery report on Jeffrey Epstein. He worked for Victoria's Secret. That's what he told me.
Their bras and panties emerging from a spaceship.
Victoria's Secret introduces Angels 2000.
At this point in time, I realized that the original Victoria was dead. She'd been killed off by angels in the spaceship, by cabaret dancers. The Earth Angels. We moved into the more aggressively sexy point of view. That's the leap the brand made.
This was the era of Sex and the City. Sex was at the forefront of that show and at the forefront of female empowerment.
And it was really frustrating to all of us internally at Victoria's Secret.
If there was a gap between fashion and softcore pornography, what Victoria's Secret did was inch it closer and closer until it was almost touching.
I remember in the beginning, Les showed me a Playboy magazine, and he wanted to make the point that the models had perfect bodies and no freckles or moles. I don't know if your camera's catching this, but I'm loaded with freckles. He was so adamant that I go after perfect women, a la Sexy Girls Next Door, that he actually made arrangements for me to fly to Chicago and have lunch with Christy Hefner.
They took one fantasy and ran with it.
A lot of you were about 9 or 10 years old when we started putting this show on CBS. And started watching it and thought, and I'll bet thought to yourselves, boy, I hope someday I can do that.
Victoria's Secret wasn't empowering women. They used such a narrow idea of beauty in their marketing that it was doing the complete opposite. It was making women feel badly about themselves.
Women are at war with their bodies. From grandmothers to teenagers, studies show 60 to 80% of American women want to be thinner than they are.
Young children are being affected by imagery
every single day.
89% of teenage girls feel the fashion industry pressures them to be skinnier.
Nothing ever changes in terms of the people they put on the runway. And the average American woman is a size 14, plain and simple. It's very frustrating sitting here watching.
We allowed a lot of bad things to happen.
From the very beginnings, the modeling business has attracted men who wanted to exploit women. Even the so-called pure queen of the modeling business, Eileen Ford, would have parties at her house where she would introduce her models to wealthy friends. Her excuse was that she wanted to ensure that the models had a comfortable life after they stopped modeling. Therefore, what they needed was rich husbands. So there have always been these men hovering around, looking for sexual rewards and financial rewards, and the business has always allowed them to get away with it.
But one man Eileen Ford does associate with in Paris is this man, the head of Karen Models, one of the largest and most prestigious agencies in the country. His name is Jean-Luc Brunel.
Here's the modeling agent from Paris who had been exposed as a super creep in 1988 by 60 Minutes.
He is acting as a matchmaker. He's got the agency, he's got the girls. His friends say, oh, Jean-Luc, I'd like to meet some girls, or we're having a party tonight. Can you bring some girls? And what happens if you say no? You don't work.
He was abusive. He exploited women, particularly underage girls. And he fled to New York. And of course, that's where Jean-Luc Brunel met Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey gives Jean-Luc Brunel $1 million to start up MC Squared, which is a modeling agency that was based in South Florida with satellite offices in Tel Aviv and in New York City. Brunel got the girls' visas. They were put up in one of Epstein's apartments on East 66th Street, and that allowed Epstein to legally bring girls from all over the world into the United States under the guise of modeling.
When you talk to the women who were abused by Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, his longtime girlfriend slash friend slash fixer, was usually the first person they talked to and the person who took them to go see Jeffrey. So she was integral to his overall scheme.
They were, in essence, predatory Bonnie and Clyde. These girls came to trust Ghislaine almost in a sisterly way or as a mother figure. And instead, she turned these girls over to Jeffrey.
Epstein was going to use whatever he needed in order to lure these girls. And he does this, of course, for his pleasure and for the pleasure of others who he intends to influence and manipulate.
In my reporting, we talked to someone named William Mook, who said that in 2005, there was a meeting with Ed Razek and Jeffrey Epstein at Epstein's mansion. And Mook said he remembers Razek saying Epstein's models are some of the best.
In the 90s, late 90s, I remember being on set and that people had mentioned this name. And then at one point, I think I was somewhere on a dinner, and this girl said to me, I'm asked to go and see Jeffrey Epstein. And I go, for Victoria's Secret? Like, why? That seems unreal. So the Epstein thing was rotating around. It was, at the few times this happened, it was definitely never Victoria's Secret who said to go see Epstein. He used Victoria's Secret as a calling card.
In the spring or summer of '93, it was reported to Les that a man was going around New York City portraying himself as a recruiter for Victoria's Secret catalog models. It was Jeffrey Epstein. And Les said he would stop it. I don't believe the behavior stopped. I believe it continued.
One woman said she met with Epstein in a California hotel room, believing she was interviewing for a job as a Victoria's Secret catalog model.
I was doing a lot of lingerie catalogs. I'm coming off of Baywatch. I've been in Playboy. I'm auditioning for all these shows. I have a vast portfolio. And I thought the one thing that might be missing is to get in the Victoria's Secret catalog. In 1997, Jeffrey Epstein had come out to California. I had a meeting with him at Shutter's Hotel in Santa Monica. I wanted to be in the Victoria's Secret catalog, so I said, okay, I'll go in the hotel room.
Hi, Christina. I just came out of the hotel for meeting Jeffrey.
I called my friend multiple times.
I didn't expect that I had to be in a bra and underwear in front of him in the hotel room, and he did give me $100 cash as well. And by that time, when he was touching my butt, I felt like such a prostitute. I put the $100 back on the table, and then he thought that I was like, why are you...
And then I thought, I should really go file a police report. I don't know what this person just did to me. He could be doing this to other girls.
Did Victoria's Secret ever know that a police report was filed by her? Did they ever ask Epstein about that? Did Les Wexner know about that? Why is the denial of a wealthy, well-known man of more value than the serious allegation to law enforcement by one woman who happens to be a model?
Apparently, nothing changed, and we also know that Wexner continued to praise Epstein even after this time. Wexner told Vanity Fair in 2003 that Epstein was, quote, very smart with excellent judgment and high standards. And he added, he's always the most loyal friend.
Jeffrey Epstein clearly profited tremendously from his friendship with Leslie Wexner. Not only was there a power of attorney signed, which gave him complete control over hundreds of millions of dollars, there was also transference of money that allowed Epstein to buy vast real estate holdings, including the Manhattan Triplex, the apartments on East 66th Street, the Stanley, New Mexico Ranch, the Avenue Foch apartment in Paris.
Epstein also got a great deal for Wexner's company plane. It's impossible to know exactly what he paid because the transaction was shrouded in so many shell companies.
When you hear something like a private jet was sold at below market value from the corporation to Epstein,
this became the one that the media has nicknamed Lolita Express, because Epstein used it sometimes to traffic underage girls. This is a culture of complicity. Many people down the hierarchy enable exploitation from the agent that represents the victim all the way to the top.
You are a Jewish guy who grew up in Columbus, Ohio, which was not a particularly friendly place to Jews. You come into a lot of money. It would only be natural to build the biggest, most luxurious, exclusive development possible near your hometown and make all of the Goyim aware of exactly how wealthy you are and exactly the kinds of people that you are going to invite into your community.
Wexner, of course, has the largest house in New Albany. It's an enormous estate, sprawling with stables and what is effectively a guest house. That house originally belongs to Wexner's original partner in New Albany, Jack Kessler. And Jack Kessler sells the house to Jeffrey Epstein for $3.5 million. Now Epstein can see from his door Wexner's mansion.
Jeffrey Epstein was incredibly active in creating Les Wexner's financial portfolio. He was a con man thinking about himself and putting himself in there to reap the dividends of this bizarre relationship.
Wexner involved Epstein very early on in the development of New Albany. Epstein's name pops up as early as 1991 in all of the overlapping entities that were involved in developing New Albany.
One senior executive said that he told Wexner, in no uncertain terms, that Epstein was a wolf. And Wexner just sat there and stared at him silently.
Epstein would turn Leslie Wexner against individuals that he thought, might be standing in his way. And certainly, there's no question in my mind that Jeffrey Epstein came between Les Wexner and his mother, Bella.
In the early 90s, Bella Wexner falls ill and she resigns from the Wexner Foundation board. Jeffrey Epstein takes her place. And then later, when she recovers, she wants her seat back. And what results is a protracted and difficult lawsuit that Wexner himself could have resolved at any point. He doesn't step in, and he's clearly at odds with his mother over it.
There was always talk that there was something else going on with Les Wexner. I remember there was a big story in New York Magazine, a cover story called The Bachelor Billionaire about Wexner. And it really caught your attention because here was this kind of elfin little guy surrounded by beautiful models. But you came away from reading it thinking, this guy's a real question mark. He's kind of a cipher.
There's been a lot of theorizing about Les's sexual orientation. But here's the thing. The story goes, Les had a number of girlfriends, and he was fairly serious, apparently, with a woman here in Columbus. Unfortunately, she was not Jewish. Bella put her foot down and said, "My grandchildren are not going to have a shiksa for a mother." And that was the end of that.
People love to gossip. If a man or a woman is not married by a certain age, people like to form opinions.
In the 80s and 90s, Fortune 500 company CEOs were just simply not gay. The very notion was incomprehensible. Wexner needed any rumor like that to go away.
And a few years later, that's when Abigail Koppel entered the picture. This beautiful, brilliant young lawyer in New York. She's not only Jewish, her father was one of the founding figures of the State of Israel. He came over and opened the El Al Israel airline office in New York.
Wexner's embraced change in his personal life. He married for the first time.
Before the marriage, Jeffrey Epstein made very clear to Les that he would oversee the prenuptial agreement.
I remember Abigail was pregnant, and I was standing chatting with her at a party. And she said she had found a nanny she wanted, But the nanny wasn't inclined to accept the job. And Abigail said, I'm gonna sick Jeffrey on her.
He can work miracles and do this, and he'll know. No. He put a classified ad in the Columbus Dispatch advertising for a nanny for a wealthy couple in New Albany. Contact Jeffrey Epstein.
What it implied to me was that he may have managed the money, but clearly Epstein was deeply involved in the personal lives of Abigail and Les.
New Albany becomes the location of some alleged crimes, and it gets very close to the Wexners, both Les and his wife. Maria Farmer was a young art student living in New York. She ended up meeting Jeffrey Epstein not long after she graduated in the summer of 1996. When I spoke to Maria, she told me that Jeffrey Epstein offered her the wonderful opportunity to spend the summer at Wexner's estate, where she's going to have great light and going to be able to paint. When Maria got to Wexner's estate, she was brought to the guest house, which was then owned by Jeffrey Epstein, and was immediately greeted by security and found that her movements were really tightly controlled. She was told that she couldn't go outside without getting explicit permission, and she was told that there were guard dogs on the property. Maria Farmer told me that 1 month into her stay, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell assaulted her. What Maria does in the aftermath of that is lock herself in her room and stack furniture against the door so that they can't get in. She called 911 and was put on hold and eventually hung up on. She then attempts to call the police. And when she reaches the local authorities, the voice on the other line says, "We're already there." And the police are actually guarding Wexner's home and his gate. And so she sort of lost all hope.
Maria said she was held against her will for a period of 12 hours before she was allowed to leave the Wexner property in New Albany. You would think that this would be in a security log, that his security team would have informed Les Wexner what had taken place. Sheriff's Department there in Franklin County says that the records from that particular night are no longer held in the archive. She eventually spoke to the FBI, and we do know that those records exist.
In the course of reporting the story, the Wexners were at first very reluctant to engage, but what they told me eventually through a spokesman that Epstein's house was just one of hundreds in a community developed by Les Wexner. And what our reporting indicated was that it was in fact impossible to access Epstein's property without going through Wexner's gate. Maria presented me with her driver's license that she had that summer, and at the bottom of that driver's license was the address 1 White Barn Road, the home address of Les and Abigail Wexner.
Maria Farmer has accused Abigail Wexner of acquiescence while Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell sexually assaulted her in the New Albany compound and effectively imprisoned her there and kept her under security guard.
What's so ironic is that Abigail Wexner was a champion of charities trying to protect younger women from domestic abuse.
People ask me, you know, did you have personal history, or why would you choose to pick this issue? And it's pretty simple. You know, the whole notion of women and children being abused in our own backyards is just not something I want to live with. And so I chose to get involved.
If somebody has done something bad, something corrupt, taken advantage of their leadership position, I will execute them publicly.
The industry overall is just exploding. And now we're also experiencing tremendous growth in the junior market as well. That's really coming on strong, the new young consumer.
In the early aughts, Wexner decided to expand his audience and marketed the new brand Pink towards young girls.
I think Les was pretty excited about Pink, and so it got a lot of attention. He saw an opportunity, and he likes to exploit an opportunity.
One day they cleared the whole hosiery room out, and they were just putting all this crazy bright colored cotton, tiny panties and matching camisoles and sweatpants out, and then the music went pop.
Pink was created to complement this bombshell Victoria's Secret brand, and it actually made them more relevant because cultural shift to that. They were targeting that millennial generation.
Ed Razek would use the term fantasy for Victoria's Secret. For Pink, the specific word that they used was FOMO. They wanted to create FOMO. They wanted people to have a fear of missing out. That was the marketing strategy, and it worked.
Here we have the little schoolgirl in her little kilt. This little girl is wearing powder puffs. Oh, and carrying a hula hoop. The New York Times called out Barbie doll-like bodies. This little Barbie is riding a tricycle. I think that's what she might be doing there.
For me, that's when I felt like something was going the wrong direction. I mean, because Pink was literally designed to target teenagers and tweens. And so that did not feel good.
That models were being assaulted by photographers, that they were also being touched and grabbed in fittings, and that other people in the Victoria's Secret organization were making comments or getting a little too handsy with the girls. Now they had this whole sexual harassment thing starting to brew over their heads.
New York Times reportedly uncovered a slew of complaints against Ed Razek, saying he acted inappropriately on several occasions. Other executives say they told Leslie Wexner about this, but nothing was done, they say.
2006, Epstein's abuse of women, particularly underage girls, came to light. He got caught. There were two very small Palm Beach Post articles that basically just stated the facts. He was arrested, his name, his address, and why he was arrested. Solicitation of prostitution, period.
The relationship between Wexner and Epstein was really pretty unknown publicly. So Wexner didn't have to answer for this relationship and continued to operate with Epstein under the radar.
Lex Wexner removed his power of attorney, but this didn't occur until December 2007, more than a year later.
Wexner is the CEO of a publicly traded company, and his closest advisor has been arrested on really lurid charges. And you have to wonder why the delay in severing ties. In my reporting, the only way I could get to the bottom of it was to try to talk to people who knew Wexner well. And all they could do was say that Epstein had to have some kind of hold over Wexner.
The end result was a lot of nothing. It was a slap on the wrist.
After 18 months in the Palm Beach detention facility, Epstein will serve another 12 months house arrest at his Palm Beach home.
An arrangement enjoyed by how many other convicted sex offenders?
He had in his tent some of the wealthiest men in the world, included a member of the royal family and Prince Andrew, that he was able to acquire through his relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. There's also two U.S. presidents, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump.
In a 2002 magazine article, Trump called Epstein a terrific guy, adding, "It is even said he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side."
Nobody paid much attention to the Florida conviction. There's some brief headlines and then it goes away. Jeffrey Epstein continued his lifestyle and pretty much said after the Florida conviction, this was nothing worse than stealing a bagel.
They were business associates at the very least, friends probably additionally, for over 20 years. It's a long time not to become aware that someone's behavior is not what it should be.
There are times when I think I've made decisions that I'm not proud of in hindsight, but I don't think I've made a decision consciously in the moment where I said, if this were on the front page of the newspaper, would I be embarrassed? And I think that, in a tough business world or a tough world, I think you can make decisions that are tough, but that have moral integrity. Now, that moral integrity and compass, your moral integrity, your ethical moral compass, has a lot of judgments.
My experience in reporting on other sort of moguls and billionaires, they're all secretive to some degree. They all want some level of privacy. But Wexner is one of the most. It begs the question, why? When there are questions that he would do well to answer, that he has avoided entirely. All the work that he put into building this fortune and this business and these brands, there's a cloud over all of it now.
Les Wexner is in some hot water. A civil complaint has been filed against Wexner, the founder of L Brands.
Victoria's Secret founder Les Wexner in the headlines again, being sued by one of the shareholders of the company he founded.
Some see the L brand image tarnished following scrutiny over Wexner's relationship with the late financier Jeffrey Epstein.
An investigation is underway in Paris after a close associate of Jeffrey Epstein, modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, was found dead this morning in his prison cell.
This is astounding to hear, considering the fact that he died exactly the same way Jeffrey Epstein did.
This is what democracy looks like.
The Me Too movement, the consciousness change, has been universal, sudden, but really it was like water building up behind a dam. And the dam broke, and there is no putting that dam back together again.
When the Harvey Weinstein accusations and the Me Too movement ramped up, that was a signal. Les missed the change. He didn't call it correctly.
Back in, I guess it was August or September of last year, I had a meeting with Harvey Weinstein at Miramax.
In fact, for the 2000 fashion show that took place in Cannes, Harvey Weinstein and Ed Razik worked closely together. Then, sometime after Harvey Weinstein personally showed up in the New York offices with a young woman in tow, wanting her to be made a Victoria's Secret model, and said he had been sent by Razik. And the fact that Weinstein, at the suggestion of Razik, might show up trying to get a young woman a job is not only poor form, it's tasteless. If there's some connection between Epstein, Weinstein, Razik, your business is going south, wouldn't that lead you to say, what's going on here? Especially somebody like Les, who was so observant.
The stock peaked at $100.22 on November 2015. And by the beginning of 2019, the stock was trading at just over $26.
A wealthy money manager whose friends have included presidents and a prince is behind bars in Manhattan tonight. Jeffrey Epstein is accused of sex trafficking and molesting underage girls.
With Epstein's second arrest, this time it was like a bomb exploded. And so everything around Jeffrey Epstein, every association he had, was under the microscope now.
The L Brands board of directors has enlisted an outside firm to conduct a review of Jeffrey Epstein's role at the retail company.
The company actually hired Davis Polk, which was Abigail Wexner's former law firm in New York, to do one of the investigations.
The implications are very cloudy, but with the relationship between Wexner and Epstein in the spotlight, and the fact that Epstein claimed that he was a Victoria's Secret recruiter, the company was forced to distance itself from any connection to Epstein. And Wexner sort of posits that he had no idea that any of this was going on, and that years before, he had immediately cut ties with Epstein after his first arrest, where he did remove power of attorney, but it took more than a year.
Everyone has to feel enormous regret for the advantage that was taken of so many young women. And that's just unexplainable, abhorrent behavior, and clearly is something we all would condemn.
A recently obtained investigation paints a different picture for L Brands. When Epstein was first arrested, documents suggest that L Brands directly aided Epstein's legal defense in 2006. One of his accusers happened to have worked for Victoria's Secret, and the L Brands legal department sent over employee records regarding this accuser. These records were not subpoenaed. They were provided voluntarily by L Brands, aiding Epstein. This information was never publicly reported.
After Epstein's second arrest, everyone that has ever been connected to this man has done everything humanly possible to distance themselves from him.
Ohio's richest man, L Brands founder Les Wexner says disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein mismanaged tens of millions of Wexner's dollars.
In the wake of all these terrible allegations, Wexner talks about his own betrayal by Epstein, that in fact, Wexner himself is a victim.
Around, I guess it was January of 2019, I got a tip that I should look into certain charitable funds associated with Wexner, and one of them happened to be a fund called the YLK Fund. Those are the initials of Abigail's father, Yehuda L. Koppel. This fund was created around the time of Epstein's case in Florida, and the president of the fund was Les Wexner's wife, Abigail. And the money was $46-some million put in there by Epstein. And it's jolting because they're taking money from this guy who's being convicted of child abuse, basically. Les claims that it was money that was stolen from him and was put back quietly so that he wouldn't be embarrassed.
Wexner admitted that Epstein stole money from him, more than the $46.7 million, and it was money that should have been reported immediately.
Being taken advantage of by someone who was so sick, so cunning, so depraved, is something that I'm embarrassed that I was even close to.
Wexner is known as being litigious, and yet he won't pursue Epstein for stealing millions upon millions of dollars. To allow that level of betrayal and dishonesty to happen unpunished is entirely unexplained.
Why didn't you sue him? What's that all about? I don't know. It just doesn't seem to add up to me.
Wexner has never specified how much money he paid Jeffrey Epstein during the time that Epstein worked for him. But in my reporting, the best estimates hover around $400 million.
Leslie Wexner was a protector and seemed to be a facilitator for Jeffrey Epstein because he was the money man behind Epstein. And I also believe they had a very complicated relationship financially, personally, and in many other ways.
Do you consider yourself to be bisexual? No. Okay. In any event, you did develop a sexual relationship with Leslie Wexner at some point in time. Is that true? No.
What exactly was the relationship? We know that it was more than a financial advisor, whether it was building his yacht, project managing things for him like New Albany, being involved in his personal life and his family in a way. It seems pretty clear that Epstein knew Wexner in a way that very few other people did, and maybe no one else did.
I've heard rumors over the years about Les's sexual orientation. But here's the thing. Do we have anybody firsthand? Do we have anybody secondhand who can say, yes, I was involved with Les? Do these people exist? If they exist, I've never heard of them. I'd never met them.
There are all these questions about the relationship that no one but Les Wexner probably knows the answer to, because now Epstein's dead, and so he took that to his grave.
Good morning. This is an NBC News special report. NBC News has learned that disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Epstein took his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City.
The medical examiner said that it was suicide. There are a number of red flags. I'm not generally a person who believes in conspiracies unless they're proven. But this should never have happened. And there's so many questions that need to be answered.
The wound is down here. You'd think if somebody hung themselves, the wound would be maybe up here.
Yes. Most hangings, the ligature slides up to beneath the jawbone, the mandible. Here it's in the middle of the neck. And to add to it, there was a total breakdown in security. The video cameras didn't work, the guards went to sleep.
An active federal agent told me just days after he was arrested on July 6th of 2019, he said to me on the phone, "Conchita, Epstein will not make it to trial." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Just listen to what I'm telling you." And he repeated his statement. And of course he didn't elaborate.
So many victims wanted to see him face justice. They wanted their day in court. They'll never have it. And what that means is they were denied the whole truth, much of which could have come out at his trial.
Are these power players a priority for us right now? Can we even touch them?
No, it's like everything. It hides in plain sight. Epstein was hiding in plain sight. We all knew about him. We all knew what he was doing. But we had no one that would go after him. They were afraid of him. For whatever reason, they were afraid of him.
This is Cindy McCain, the wife of John McCain, admitting at a conference that everyone knew what Epstein was up to, and this is the wife of a former Republican presidential candidate. You know, that's hugely significant to say that it was just known and that powerful circles did nothing about it. And so that directly undercuts this whole narrative that, oh, it was just Epstein and he conned everyone. But this didn't get really any mainstream coverage at all.
People need to understand the fact that government, the financial world, specifically the banking world, have enabled Jeffrey Epstein's crimes.
Epstein was a collector of people. Not only did he do financial business with these places, but he also used them to bolster his own profile. Same way he did with Les Wexner.
As a guy who had never graduated college, Jeffrey Epstein was correctly assuming that if he gave enough money, then he could wear the Harvard sweater around no problem, and he would get some of that sheen. And he was absolutely right. It worked flawlessly.
There's no question that in death, Jeffrey Epstein now is continuing to destroy the lives and the reputations of many wealthy men.
Wall Street power broker Leon Black is stepping down as CEO of the giant investment
Fair dives into Epstein's relationship with billionaire hedge fund manager Glenn Dubin.
Barclays CEO Jess Staley is stepping down, this following an investigation.
Britain's Prince Andrew says he is appalled by recent sex abuse claims about his former friend.
Former President Bill Clinton reportedly took more than 24 trips on Epstein's private jet.
Controversy also put a spotlight on President Trump's relationship with Epstein.
Questions are swirling around the state of Bill and Melinda Gates' marriage. One source of concern for Melinda was Bill's dealings with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful.
All of these men have claimed that they were not aware of Jeffrey Epstein's secret life and that they were not participants in that dark world.
This was not about some drug cartel trafficking children into the United States. This was about a rich man who did not need money, so why was he bringing children from all over the world and introducing them to politicians and rich men? Why was he doing this? I believe that he needed them for something uniquely different. One, pleasure, and two, power. And that power came through blackmail. And that's what these girls were to him. They were a tool of blackmail, period.
The earliest mention of this infrastructure being set up comes from the New York Times in 1996, talking about Epstein's mansion that he got from Wexner, where a lot of his notorious activities were known to have taken place. It describes this spy-style James Bond bathroom connected to CCTV cameras throughout the premises.
Was there videotape?
Oh, yeah, it was all video, all the time, yeah. And I asked him one time, what do you do with this? And he said, I keep it. I keep everything in my safe.
The government officials, the politicians, the royalty, they were taping everybody every moment when you walked into the New York mansion, to Palm Beach. Everything was being filmed.
There's still question to this day, where is all of that material? Has that material been hidden away? There's an individual named John Mark Dugan. He's a former Palm Beach County Sheriff's officer, and he's told a story that's straight out of a spy novel. He claims the lead detective on the case in Palm Beach, Florida, turned over to John Mark Dugan 700 CDs containing video evidence involving men engaging in sexual relations with the young women at Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. Dugan claims that the authorities have seen these videotapes. What's interesting is that John Mark Dugan escaped to Russia. And you have to wonder, has this played into Putin's world? There's a photo of him and the man who was in Putin's inner circle. So does Putin have something on individuals in the US about any of this? Now, John Mark Dugan does categorically deny that.
No one has ever been able to establish that Epstein, in fact, did have recordings, but all you need is the fear of exposure for that kind of power to accrue to him.
Pentagon porn story began in 2006. Child pornography sting operation called Project Flicker. Hundreds of military employees and contractors who may have bought child pornography online but haven't been prosecuted or even in some cases investigated. List of 5,200 from an internet sting operation whose payment records of about 5,200 people, many of whom provided Army or fleet zip codes or military email addresses, including staffers for the Secretary of Defense and contractors at the NSA. 9 people had top security clearances.
I think Leslie Wexner, because of his influence, his money, and his power, is able to operate in a way that other people in Ohio are not able to operate.
In the 1990s, Les got some 747 cargo jets and helped establish Rickenbacker Airport as a thriving hub for international cargo.
1995, a company called Southern Air Transport relocates from Miami to Columbus, Ohio, with the assistance of Les Wexner. Southern Air Transport had been involved and connected to Iran-Contra.
Southern Air Transport was owned by the CIA. Now it's a private company, but its competitors still call it the CIA's favorite airline.
Epstein himself boasted that he had connections to the CIA.
Epstein visited the Clinton White House 17 times. 12 of those times happened in 1994 alone, the year before Les Wexner helps relocate Southern Air Transport from Miami to Columbus. Now, what business might Jeffrey Epstein have had at the Clinton White House? We don't know. We may never know.
Were you ever made aware at any point in your handling of this case if Mr. Epstein was an intelligence asset of some sort?
So there has been reporting to that effect, and let me say, there's been reporting to a lot of effects in this case, not just now but over the years, and again,
Alexander Acosta was the lawyer for the Southern District in Miami during Epstein's slap on the wrist conviction.
This is what the news is like now. Acosta's always been able to be a little vague in his justifications for why he did this agreement to not prosecute Epstein.
A few years later, Acosta claimed that Jeffrey Epstein's very mild sentencing came as a result of higher-ups who told Acosta that Epstein was connected to intelligence. But there's yet another level to this story. Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein operated in this inner world of very, very wealthy men who were staunch backers of Israel and who are rumored to have various connections to the Mossad. In fact, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, was said to have been connected to the Mossad through Israeli intelligence.
I remember post 9/11, when Les came into the store, he had a bulletproof vest on and always had a lot of security with him. We knew that he was very involved in Israel. That was what we were sort of told, why there was so much security for him then. It was kind of a big deal, but it was pretty regular.
Les was always a huge pro-Israel endorser and gave a great deal of money to many charities and through the Wexner Foundation.
Epstein was always in the background, moving money around on behalf of Wexner. And Wexner's money was the engine for organizations which had enormous political influence.
In the 2000s, the Wexner Foundation paid a bunch of money to come up with a communication strategy related to the Iraq War to, win the hearts and minds on behalf of Israel. But at a certain point, though, part of their involvement is to be plugged into this bigger political game to make sure that their preferred outcomes happen, which makes you wonder how many more layers there are to this world. Where the story of Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein starts to feel even darker to me is when you start to think about what are the ideas that these guys might have shared. What are the beliefs about the world, about humanity? What did they hold in common?
I've been told that Wexner was so egomaniacal that he commissioned the creation of an artificial intelligence bot, something like IBM's Watson, only called Wexner, to impart his timeless knowledge of marketing and merchandising.
And there's also this report that Jeffrey Epstein sought out the leading scientists that he could buy access to for his experiment to artificially inseminate dozens of women with his semen in an effort to improve the quality of the human race, with his genetic material. Evidently, there were not many takers. The idea of having a legacy that lives on forever, whether it's Epstein's master race or Les Wexner's AI scheming, it all speaks to this very scary, dark, ideological place that our country's ruling class and elites reside in, and the rest of us are not a part of their plan.
The Epstein scandal pulled back a curtain and shone a light on at least some of the secret behavior of billionaires in our world. And we were never supposed to see any of it. This is all a story that was meant to be hidden and stay hidden.
There are still so many unanswered questions about Epstein, the people who were around him and what exactly they were doing. Wexner's secrecy doesn't seem to have served him nor Victoria's Secret.
In the wake of investigations that are continuing to take place, a lawsuit was filed in Delaware on behalf of shareholders involving Wexner's company.
According to a complaint filed by a current L Brand shareholder, Leslie Wexner created a culture within his company of misogyny, bullying, and harassment, as well as ties to Jeffrey Epstein and other egregious mismanagement. Victoria's Secret is doing damage control tonight, fighting back against accusations of sexual harassment by a top executive.
In 2020, in this New York Times piece, we learned that employees and models had actually lodged harassment claims against Ed Razek back in 2018.
According to the Times, Razek tried to kiss models and asked them to sit on his lap. Supermodel Bella Hadid was reportedly subjected to crude comments about her breasts.
The lawsuit says that despite numerous complaints made to the company's Human Resources Department, neither Les Wexner nor any member of the board did anything about it.
Razek released a statement calling the accusations categorically untrue, misconstrued, or taken out of context.
The claims against Ed and the Jeffrey Epstein relationship all come to light in the press, and together it became a story that you couldn't ignore. It was a perfect storm of problems for Les Wexner. Things were falling apart.
By 2021, Wexner's empire was reduced to 2 companies, Victoria's Secret and Bath & Body Works. Because of the controversies surrounding it, Victoria's Secret was dragging L Brand's stock down.
In the case of L Brands, change was needed. There was so much pessimism at the time about Victoria's Secret, and so we issued a plan to improve shareholder value.
Our state's richest man is officially retired. Les Wexner was the longest-serving CEO in S&P 500 history, with 56 years on the job.
Must have been difficult for Les to step down like that. That's the kind, thoughtful side of me. And then on a business side, I was like, it's about time.
You're able to say why you decided to step down. Was it related to concerns about culture within your company?
No, of course.
Or the fallout from Mr. Epstein?
Thanks.
The only way for Victoria's Secret to survive is if they can appear to be a newborn, not the product of Les Wexner or a product of the Limited or an offspring of Victoria's Secret, but a whole new idea for a whole new world.
Victoria's Secret saying goodbye to its angels. The company is making a major shift as it begins to rebrand, aiming to be more inclusive.
They're replacing the catwalkers with woke talkers.
The company is now signing 7 women with unique backgrounds, including soccer star Megan Rapinoe and transgender Brazilian model Valentina Sampaio.
Will this rebranding work? Will consumers return to this giant retailer, or did they miss the boat with being diverse and inclusive?
Victoria's Secret has replaced the Angels with the VS Collective, which is a group of women that they selected for their diversity and for their activism.
Now you see Victoria's Secret desperately, and really desperately, I mean, you can see them sweat, trying to catch up.
The transformation that we have at Victoria's Secret begins with the admission that we got it wrong. We lost relevance with the modern woman.
Victoria's Secret attempting what some are calling one of the biggest brand transformations in recent memory.
I'm glad Victoria's Secret woke up. They had to. Were they late to the table? Absolutely.
It feels a little focus groupy, like it came out of a think tank a little bit, but it's a step forward.
With the change of management, Victoria's Secret's making really great strides
to change the brand into a women's brand versus a man's brand sold to women. They're featuring pregnant models. They're featuring models who are older. They're featuring models with different body types, which is exactly what everybody wanted to see in 2016, 2017, 2018.
Sexy is obviously something to be celebrated, but it is broader because a female consumer is not just one thing, she's many.
It's hard for me to look at Victoria's Secret the same way after all the allegations that have come out. I think they do have a lot of work to do to prove that they are changing, but I guess only time will tell.
Is it reactive? Probably. Should you do it? Right, yeah, you should. I mean, you know, so it's kind of like, what are the options? Get criticized for changing or don't change?
Just because your branding is earth tones and feel-good messaging doesn't mean that you're actually believing in these things. I personally feel like it's just a good marketing campaign and nothing else. Today, a male is still the leader of this organization, creating a women-driven industry.
The fashion industry is based on something that is not true. I don't know how long that illusion will last, and I think the brands that will do well is the ones that is coming from true integrity.
The complex of magazines, manufacturers, designers, models is still going to exist, but it's going to be very different. The magazine brands don't matter. Malls all across America, they're dying. Social media has changed things, but it's not the end of this change. It's just the beginning.
How great that we have entered an era where difference is beginning to be celebrated. But at the same time, Instagram has totally created this insane world of filters, and the plastic surgeons are racing to keep up with whatever the trends of these filters are making people look like.
If you look at influencers, it's an extremely homogenous look, like the lips, the pose, the hair, the butt, the breasts. I think that Victoria's Secret's legacy is very present there.
Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the late and disgraced media mogul Robert Maxwell, has tonight been found guilty of having helped her lover, the financier Jeffrey Epstein, sexually abuse teenage girls.
Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in 2020 for her association with Epstein. Now that she's been found guilty, she could spend the rest of her life in prison.
Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. Do you feel that she's going to turn in powerful men?
I just wish her well, frankly.
The powerful, uber wealthy people who were around Epstein have reputations to protect and have been up to this point sort of impenetrable. They all have this chink of vulnerability.
An investigation is underway in Paris after a close associate of disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, was found dead this morning in his prison cell.
The family of Ghislaine Maxwell says they're worried for her safety after the
This is astounding to hear, considering the fact that he died exactly the same way Jeffrey Epstein did.
Epstein was just one person operating within this network. And if you look more at what the power structure is that enabled Epstein to do this network is essentially a business that's too big to fail, sort of like the Wall Street banks in the 2008 crisis, because of their reach and the damage that would be done. the same power structure, if it was investigated and brought into the forefront of American public consciousness, it would have, similarly huge ramifications.
The board of L Brands conducted 2 investigations into the business relationship between Epstein and Wexner and have made no public report. If something was done that was illegal, that needs to be reported.
I grew up near too many malls to count. And if I were to go into a mall and I were to open up my wallet and spend dollars on clothes as a kid, there's a good chance that those dollars were going to Les Wexner. And, axiomatically, those dollars were going to Jeffrey Epstein.
I think Wexner is going to be remembered as an enormously visionary and also incredibly flawed and damaged person in the history of American business. The Epstein story has done more damage to him than anything else in his life. Even as his legacy has been tarnished, he's still amassing wealth and still one of the most powerful billionaires in the country.
I remember my dad said, "You have a lot of ability, much more than I ever thought you had. You have real ability, and just be careful how you use it."